And our house is about a block and a half from that museum. And when my father was retired, he worked and loved that museum and worked with this wonderful man named Dave Taghon. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dave Taghon. He was born in Empire. He graduated from Glen Lake Schools. He spent 4 years in the Air Force in Florida. He married Diane in 1964 while stationed in Florida. She was from downtown Cedar. Dave's parents were also born in Empire. Dave's brother used to operate a automobile repair shop. Dave himself had Taghon's service station, and in 1984 they changed that into a convenience store as well as a service station. He retired with Diane in 2002. Right now, the area in Empire where the service station is empty because they're building a new one, the people that acquired it. So don't think you can buy gas in Empire right now, but maybe in a few months. So Glen Lake's not that far. There's one on 72 going into Empire. Dave was on the village council from 1967 until 94. He was mayor from 1980 until 1994. Grandparents came from Belgium, one in 1905. Both his parents were Empire born.
Wow.
And I'm going to ask you, before you do all of the museum stuff, Dave, a lot of these people don't know about why Empire is, about the boat that sank. They don't know. You can plug the book that's for sale called Some Other Day that will tell you those things, and tell us a little about the Air Force Station too. Because lots of people were stationed there in the 50s during the Cold War, because there were these radar domes, and people then loved it so much that they came back and retired there. Dave Taghon.
This is just a little flyer on our 4-building complex. Gives you an idea. We've been very fortunate for a small town. But just to highlight Judy's point, the schooner, the side-wheeler Empire State went aground off Empire in 1849. Wow. And the very beginning of this little short 10-minute video will show that boat we acquired that came from a museum in Chicago of December of 22. And I had to do a lot of work to restore it, and a good friend of mine built a glass case. But the little video will tell you about that boat. But that's what Empire was named after, because when they resurveyed Empire in 1855, there was no town there, but Orange Risden, the surveyor, mentioned the Empire Bluffs, so we know it had to be because of the side-wheel that went aground there in 49. They refloated the boat, they got all the people off it the next day, nobody drowned, but it was really quite a story. We have a booklet that a good friend of mine, Claude Fields, put out on it. They all got together and prayed, thanking the Captain Hazard, a strange name, Hazard, but for saving their lives and grounding the boat off Empire. Another boat went by that they criticized critically for not stopping and helping them, but we just have to, the Captain Hazard said this was a good captain, he must not have seen us on shore, you know. So they didn't get any help till the next day. Another boat came by and rescued 140 people on it. But it was a beautiful old side-wheeler. It was the most luxurious and one of the grandest on the Great Lakes at the time, and the fastest. But they refloated it. It lasted another 7 years. Those boats were only good for about 10 or 12 years because of the structure. But so you'll see a little bit about that boat here, and then any questions later, feel free to ask. This is just a little 10-minute introduction. But another side point Judy mentioned was the Empire Air Force Base started in 1950 during the Cold War, part of the DEW line. It was a 52nd ACNW Squadron, had up to 4 domes there at one time. At one point in the late 50s, they had an NCO school there that brought in another couple hundred sergeants to train them there. And once in a while they'd march downtown, and there'd be 200 airmen in their blues marching from the air base the 2 miles downtown and back up that hill. So at the time it was a pretty active base. And it was pretty much sidelined in 78. Then the FAA still has one tower there today. So that's another part of Empire's history. But let's just do, thanks to this gal, she's gonna fire it up. This is just a quick 10-minute overview, and can give you a little mini history, the sequence that we've been so fortunate for a small town to have. Welcome to our Empire Area Museum Complex. This is our main building, built in 1987, and we'd like to just give you a quick look around at our 4-building complex. This boat was acquired from a museum in Chicago in December of 21. I spent the winter rebuilding it and adding new stacks and lifeboats and completely redoing it. But this is the reason Empire was named. This side wheeler went aground off Empire in 1849, and we were able to get this beautiful model from a museum in Chicago and recondition it. A friend of mine from Twin Bay Glass redid this beautiful glass case for us. So that's one of our new highlights of our museum complex. This is the Rowan Saloon. We found 2 brothers dead in their house in January of 1985, and within 2 years we had built this beautiful museum. After we went to the auction, we had raised $15,000 to buy the bar-related items, and then this property was donated by Paul and Frances Johnson. We received a $100,000 grant to the Michigan Equity Grant Program and built this beautiful building and dedicated it in June of 1987. Last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary, being formed in 1972, so we have hats and shirts available just to help promote the museum. But the museum bar is certainly one of our highlights. (1908) Edison phonograph. Plays a little cylinder like this. This room features our founder's room, we call it, honoring our first 3 Johns in the Empire area. On the left is the LaRues, and in the middle is the Fishers, and on the right the Dorseys. The 3 founding 3 Johns that came to this area starting in about 1854. This is what sort of got me involved in the museum. I made this scale model of what the Empire Lumber Company looked like along the shore of Lake Michigan about 1900, and I did this model in 1976. So that's been 47 years ago since I've been beginning my involvement in the Empire Museum. So this shows you what it looked like along the shore of Lake Michigan, which is now our beautiful public beach. In this case, are artifacts that were dug up along the shore of Lake Michigan by Joe Bolton and Julia Dickinson starting in 1972, which was the beginning of our heritage group. These ladies would go down in winter, set on the frozen sand using grub hose to dig up all these artifacts that the people would throw from Norway Town over the bank of Lake Michigan, since there was literally no value to Lake Michigan property at the time. This is what started our organization in 1972. Remnants like this. These are mannequins from Bronner's donated to the museum by the Cherniak family, beautifully reconditioned by Claudia and Sonny Cherniak. That's our woodworking shop. And our blacksmith shop. There's a look over here at a covered wagon from the Ohio Valley. And on the left is Dr. Frelick's buggy, who was a prominent doctor in the area from Maple City in the early 1900s for many years. Sail and rail case showing the highlights of the railroads that came into Empire and some of the many, many boats that hauled lumber from here to Chicago. The reason Empire was here because the Empire Lumber Company, and this was a good hardwood area, so in 1892 they brought in a railroad till the mill burnt in 1917, and then they would bring all the logs to Empire, cut them into boards, then haul them to Chicago by boat and turn it into hardwood flooring. Some of the tools and some of the logs of the old lumber days, including D.H. Day from Glen Haven, another prominent lumberman in our area. This is a 1924 vintage gas station ran by Charles and Louise Taghon in the early 20s. And in front of it sits a beautiful 1923 Model T donated by Dorothy and Bob Frad. The Taghon service sign has been lit up since 1958 and never been out. It was built when my dad built a gas station in 1958, added that sign to the front window. I moved it down here in 2002 when I retired, and it remains lit yet today somehow. The 1907 launch was owned by the Flairledge family on loan by Tom Flairledge. It was purchased by his brother, and it's been sitting on this trailer for nearly 60 years, built in 1907 in Leland, Michigan. This, what we call a schoolhouse, was originally a church located on M109 across from the Maple Grove Cemetery, dating back maybe as early as 1880s. Then it was relocated south of Empire. Then we brought it back to this location in the 90s and turned it into a school-church combination, which we can give you a quick look at. Beautiful old building. That's about a 1917 Allen car that was purchased at the Rowan auction in 1985 by a guy named Allen up in Sutton's Bay at Northport. He completely reconditioned it, ran it for 35 years, and donated it to the museum about 5 years ago. This old slave was built in Cedar, Michigan, about 1911 or 12, and used as a school bus. And big families also use the same type of rigs just to tote their 10 or 12 kids around Cedar. So this is in very original conditions. Pretty neat piece to have. Part of our buggies and slave displays. The stagecoach is, of course, a reproduction on an original type frame underneath it, built by Doc Eshelman and used out in the peninsula in Traverse City for years. Wagon that was found in one of the National Park buildings, parts of it. We had the wheel from the beginning. We got the box from a building up in Port Oneida. And on the wall to your left is a curtain from the Glen Harbor Town Hall, probably in the 1950s. All the businesses that were identified then, I've made a sheet updating those businesses to tell what's there today. So, but that graced the town hall in Glen Arbor for many, many years. This is where we store all our records. I've got 9 fireproof file cabinets in here. All these. This original building was built in 1911, called a hose house, because this is where they dried the hoses after fire in the tower on the back of this building. So we've kept part of this end of it, a replica of Empire's early stages of firefighting equipment, hand-pulled carts. We didn't become motorized till 1948 when they purchased 2 1917 Seagraves and brought us into the modern world. And then we're open to any questions. Just this end of that building, 28 square feet. The building is 20 by 40. So we started off with 20 square feet in 1976. That's a big centennial. So we started off with half that building. Then we discovered an anchor out in Lake Michigan, a bunch of us, and Charlie, her dad, great guy. He loaned us his 3 horsepower Sears air-cooled outboard motor to put on my boat and my pontoon boat. We hauled it from, I live on South Bar Lake, we hauled it across, put it in Lake Michigan, and went out and salvaged the anchor, salvaged it, and Chuck, big part of it.
We have videos.
Loved it.
It looks like you've done a lot of restoration of things. Has that been done by volunteers, or have you pulled in a combination?
All volunteers.
All volunteers?
When you first saw that beautiful bar, we purchased it at the Rowan auction. Me and another fellow found the bodies dead. 2 of the brothers had died. A 3rd brother disappeared 7 years before that. So it made the Houston Chronicle and the Tampa Tribune and all the national news. Where's Siebert, the 3rd brother? But I had a couple run-ins with Siebert. He was getting quite senile in his old age. But then a friend of mine came in to drink coffee in my store and give me his quarter every day. He'd give me a quarter for his hot chocolate. But he said, I tried calling Andy last night, one of the 2 surviving brothers, but he said he didn't answer. He said, then I tried him again this morning. I said, let's go, something's wrong. So I called my wife to come in to work at the store, went up and found them both dead in the house. Wow. Andy had died of lack of insulin, and Ben was quite senile himself by that point, and was found face up looking at that golden eagle that you might have saw in the first part of the video. So that started, then we went to their auction that fall. I was supposed to be the administrator of the estate, but one of the 3 heirs was my step-aunt, my mother's half-sister. So the other 2 heirs said no way that they were going to let this guy be the administrator. So the Empire Bank was hired, and we went through the house and found nearly $100,000 in cash. Then we went to the auction, spent $15,000 I had raised between one of my other aunts, gave me $5,000 to start the pot rolling. And we raised $15,000 and kept most all that beautiful bar you saw. Restored it. It was in terrible shape, but a bunch of us worked when we got the new museum built. This was in '85, so by '86 we got the land donated, got the grant from the Michigan Equity Grant Program in '86, and opened our building June of '87. So it was quite a project, and we raised $3,000 at the auction using the Lions Club grub bag. So we were very fortunate then to get that $100,000 grant. Then a few years later, we had a lady donate $40,000. We have a little Century Club. I don't know if you guys use a Century Club or not. If you give $100 annually, you get your name on a plaque. Then we keep moving that plaque up as you give more years. One of our members, the most anybody has given so far has been 22 years. But anyway, through that Century Club, helps fund the museum greatly.
Can I
intercept.
Please do.
They should go back to when our building, our heritage group was kind of like you. We had almost all pioneer families from the whole area, which included Glen Arbor, Empire, a little bit of Honor. So anyway, these people were a big part of getting our museum started. And of course, they had kids, aunts, uncles, and everything, so, you know, you spread the word, and then, so that really helped.
That certainly got us going. Joe Bolton and Julia Dickinson setting on frozen sand down along Lake Michigan and then getting up with grub hose to dig that stuff out you saw in that long glass case was what got us started. Then a bunch of native, at that time it was mostly all local people. 17 out of the first 19, I think, were from our immediate area. We would show stuff at the Masonic Temple once a year, 2 days, from 72 to 76. Then we took over half of that hose house, and then a few years later, in 82, we took over the remaining of that building. So then we had 40 foot by 20. So we had all kinds of room, almost as big as this room here. This is about 20 by 40, I would say. It's pretty close to it. And that was our entire museum at the time. Then I mentioned about 85 finding their own brothers. And then we got the land donated, and then Joe Bolton, my co-director, or I was her subordinate, believe me, she was the leader, and she roped me into this business. But that model you saw in the scale of the one I built in 1976 got me hooked. But anyway, then Joe right away says, we need a schoolhouse. Not that this is after we had that beautiful new 40 by 80 two-story building, pretty luxurious for our
But
little
she was
group.
a school teacher, and so was the other lady.
Yeah, they had both.
They were president, vice president, and so they wanted to get the.
So we went out and
young
got kicked out of
kids.
more one-room schoolhouses than I want to admit to. People literally come in and say, get the hell out of here, what are you doing in here? Well, we're looking for a schoolhouse, but they didn't care. If they didn't want us in there, that was their right, but we should have never went into some of the buildings we went into. But anyway, in 1988, the lady south of Empire donated her schoolhouse, which was originally a church, as I mentioned, up on M109. So that got us going with that building. And then in 1990, an old friend of mine that used to come to my store twice a day to drink coffee died, and he left his estate to the museum.
Wow.
He first left everything to the Roman Catholic Church of the Benevolent Society of New York City, New York, somehow. He must have done it at the senior center, I imagine. And Billy said, I want to leave my money to the Catholic Church. So, and Bill wanted me at that point, we built the museum in 87. So by 90, Bill was very involved. Every place I went, Billy went with me when we were collecting stuff or whatever. But then he said, I want to, and we looked up in his will, and it said, to the Greater Benevolent Society of Roman Catholics of New York. I said, Bill, is that who you want to leave it to? Because I'm Catholic in Empire. Billy was a good Catholic. He said, no, I want to leave it to the museum. He had decided by then. Changed his will in about 1 week. Glenn Ellsworth, a long time, maybe some of you knew Glenn from Traverse City, went ahead and changed the will of Billy. So when he died, he left everything to the museum. So with that, we added about $16,000 to our kitty because we built the barn. And we got $27,000 total, built the barn for $11,000, put 16 in the bank. And then they wanted to move our original building when they wanted to expand the library. So that became our fourth building in about 1996 when they expanded the library in Empire. I went up and said, I think we can squeeze that in there someplace. But now we're very full. We're pretty much filled up. And since then, we've added 44 feet to this building. You can see it here.
Yeah.
Originally was that part there. We added 44 feet
Wow.
by 28 and put an 8-foot overhang porch, which makes it much nicer in our Heritage Days, which is the second weekend in October. It gives us, if we have inclement weather, that'll give us a lot more room to display stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe
I'm confused about this, but you were talking about when the ladies sat on the beach and dug up all those artifacts, the
Yep.
dishes and everything, and you said something about the city of Norway or something. Did they come across from Wisconsin or?
No,
what?
I should have made myself
I
clear.
didn't know what
Norway
you
Town,
meant.
the Westy girls know where Norway Town was.
Oh, there's a
But
town
south-
called Norway.
Yes, it was south of the Empire Beach,
Oh.
built by Norwegians who
Okay.
came here in 1892 to work for the Empire Lumber Company, of which Andy Rowan, who had the saloon, the original Andy Rowan, brought these Norwegians in here, and the Empire Lumber Company allowed them to build along the shore of Lake Michigan. So that was, and there was a dozen homes down there right on the edge of the lake, which reminded them of the fjords of Norway, I guess. But all the rubble they would just throw over the bank toward Lake Michigan. Says, what the heck, that stuff's not worth it. It's just wasted area, you know. Even when I was a kid, we would find wagon wheels, buggy parts, but now Lake Michigan has been up and down so many times, as you all know, living out here particularly. Lake Michigan finally got the best of it and ate that whole area up. So that was Norway Town, just a dozen homes. They did all their shopping uptown. There was never a store or anything, but they'd come uptown until they learned English with an interpreter to buy their goods and that, so.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Where is the old air base?
Where is it? Where was it?
Yeah,
Just south of Empire, up on a great big hill.
okay.
Property owned by Helen Ellsworth, sold it to the federal government in 1948. In 49, they started building, and it opened in 50.
So the big dome,
There's still one big dome up there now. The FAA still runs
They
part
still
of it.
run that?
Mhm.
National Park Service has got.
Now the National Park
Some of the
has,
buildings there.
what buildings are left, they tore down all the dorm buildings.
Yeah.
There was 4 or 5 dorms that would house 40 to 60 airmen. Tore those buildings down, but they kept the NCO, not the NCO club, the Chow Hall is still there. The maintenance building is now all maintenance for the National Park. Part of the officers' quarters is used for park offices, so they pretty much take it over and run the whole thing now. One other thing I'll just have to mention, a good friend of mine died. Well, another lady I told you gave us $40,000, which was a tremendous boost. And 3 years ago, one of our, Joe Bolton's husband, who's still alive and well, gave us $50,000 to make sure if we ever have to hire somebody, we're all volunteer like you are here, 100%. But if we ever get to the point, if we don't have these wonderful 60 volunteers to hire somebody, so that gave us a $50,000 kitty. So we had a nice little kitty going. And then a good friend of mine who lived on Glen Lake by the name of Tom Foster died. He always said, Dave, I'm going to take care of the museum. And I thought, sure, Tom. But he was one of the members that gave $100 a year for 22 years to the museum. And I thought Tom has died and never heard from him again. But 8 months ago, we got a letter from attorneys for Tom Foster's estate. And he had $1.7 million in his estate. And is going to divide it among 8 organizations.
Oh my goodness.
One of which is our museum, one is the Glen Lake Community Schools, one is the Salvation Army, one is the School for the Deaf, and I think 4 other churches. And I just finally, it's been 8 months and 5 days since I got this initial letter, and very little contact from these attorneys. Till this morning, we went to church and went to breakfast and got home and had a message from the gal, the contact. She said, I'm sorry I haven't called you before. We're working on the estate. We hope to get a lot done in the next couple weeks. So that'll be a tremendous assurance that our museum stays intact.
Wow. That's wonderful.
So, very lucky.
Do you have appraisals done of your things and do you insure the contents?
Yes, the township insures us, and we just reviewed that 2 months ago because we didn't, and I've been with it for 47 years. Bill Bolton, who was a township supervisor when I was the mayor, when we built the building, decided to go through the township because it encompassed a lot more people. So we got the grant of $100,000, got the property donated, which belongs to the museum, but the buildings all technically belong to the township, probably very similar to what you have here. We're the caretakers, but we're trying to set up an agreement where if the museum was to ever burn down, and we're about 46 feet from the fire department, so we feel comfortable. Maybe it's 42 feet.
Knock on wood.
So we feel good. Matter of fact, next week I'm having people from EPS, I think it is, that do the smoke alarm systems.
Yeah.
We put in a new smoke alarm system last year, and they're coming out Monday to review it, which they're supposed to do once a year, since we pay them $100 a month. But anyway, hopefully, we're well insured through the township, almost $1 million in the buildings, plus he just updated our, what do you call it? Our content, excuse me, I'm going to blank here. They just upgraded our contents considerably, because one of our buildings was far undershirt, the Billy Beeman Barn, because we've got several horse-drawn carriages and sleighs and buggies and wagons, and now we've got that 17 Allen, and I'm having a heck of a time getting the value of that Allen. Even Haggerty Insurance in Traverse City is having a hard time finding a value, and it may be 20,000. I don't know. I hope it's around that. The Model T we know is only worth about, if any of you collect or have cars, 12 to 14,000 for the nicely restored Model T. But it all adds up, of course, for our content. So we feel very comfortable, and we have a $250,000 umbrella just for paper goods if there was ever to be a fire. And with 9 fireproof file cabinets in the hose house, we've got a lot of paper goods, you know, and I've got, those 9 are very full. We just got all the books from the Glen Arbor Women's Club donated to the museum, which, that's what we're there for. We're the caretakers of this stuff, you know. So hopefully we can do them all service, try and keep most of it that we can in fireproof cabinets in case the fire department falls asleep next morning. We couldn't be in a better location. But you still, if you were to dial 911, or if that smoke alarm went off, it first goes to Grand Rapids, then my neighbor's house, so it may take 2 minutes, I don't know how long, but it shouldn't take long to get to the right place anyway, so.
Dave, can I add one little,
Yes.
little tidbit? Not that you haven't done a good job, but, so I'm the treasurer
For 20 years.
since, yeah, Dave's been a president, but there's
Way too
been
many
presidents way before him. It's not like my granddaughter says he owns the museum. Anyway, I'm the treasurer and I also clean the bathroom, so you get the idea. But I just
Not
want to
doing
say, you mentioned fundraising, and when this group got together, we got our first buildings and then the second buildings and stuff. Our biggest fundraiser was through membership, doing a lot of mailings and stuff like that. And really, that was probably one of the big things that really gave us our solid support. Plus, everyone that worked there was volunteer, so that helped a lot. And then little by little, donations from people that passed away or retired and did well, so that kind of built up too. Now, I think our Century Club membership is probably the main thing that really holds us out, because we don't send out mailings anymore. We're on the email, but it's not like you're getting a letter from the Salvation Army that reminds you of it, so, but that's kind of
Century
the
Club,
background of that, fundraising.
Diane's right, Century Club is people that give $100 annually, and there's a little plaque, and it goes from 1 year to 2 years, then 3 to 5 years. We keep moving the plaque over, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15, and then 15 to 20 plus. And we've had 2 or 3 that have been donating $100 a year for over 20 years.
And
So
some people just want to give once $100, maybe that's all they can get. I always say, you know, he says, how much is Century Club? And I says, well, it could be $100 or $1,000 if you want. So they get their name on the plaque, and we, of course, respond to everybody that does a donation.
and again, we do a lot of, we've had published some other day book, then a picture book, then a cookbook, and then we've published smaller booklets. So the sales of those booklets are pretty steady. You know, we ordered 2,000 in the last 10 years, but that's all right. Because I don't know if we get 5,000 to 8,000 visitors a year, and we should get more. We're right on M22, just north of the village. So it's just a matter of getting the word out.
So then over the years, our PR has been a lot of this Anchor Day celebration. Not everybody has an Anchor Day celebration. And from finding the anchor, and that wound up becoming a fundraiser. So, and then we also have Heritage Days, and then we had quilters in Empire that made a quilt, and then when that was part of a fundraiser, we had tickets for quilting.
That lasted 40 years till this year. This is the first year in 40 years that we do not have a young enough group to quilt anymore. So, but we've been very fortunate. Every year, for the first 20 years, it was split 1 year for the museum and the next year for the fire department. But now it's a Glen Lake Regional Empire Fire Department. So the last 6 or 8 years, it's been a benefit for the museum. It's a couple $1,000 a year, but it gets your name out there and everybody wants to win that quilt. So we've been very fortunate for a small town. I keep saying very fortunate to have what we've had. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Admission fees?
Donations?
Admission fees, whatever you choose.
Donations, right. We've kicked around $2 and $5. I think we have a suggestion, $2 a person, $5 a family or something, but
His Aunt Sarah never had children. She was, when she was a docent, when we were at, you would no more put 2 feet in the door. And she says, oh, and we only run by donations, so here's our donation. That was a big no.
Sarah was very good at that. Other volunteers count everyone that comes in the door, which is fine. We like to get an idea or a handle on what our people is, but you can't control. You know, people come in with 6 or 8 people and one might sign, so you just don't know that. But, overall, we've been very fortunate. From the Rowan house, that was from the
Rowan Pioneer family.
Right, he started in 1892 to pile lumber along the shore. Then by 1900, he had built a boarding house, and then he was in the saloon business. And then his 5 sons took all that stuff home, and it was all over the farm when he died. Upstairs in a chicken coop in a barn, and then we put it all together. And we spent $5,000 the first day of the auction on the front bar and the back bar, and then we were broke because I'd raised $5,000. So the next, I didn't know, but the friend of mine that found the bodies with me went to one of my Aunt Lita particularly, she was a tightwad, said, Lita, how about kicking in some money to make sure we keep this bar in Empire? So they agreed to kick in up to $10,000. So we had spent $5,000 the first day, then $8,000 the next day, because the auction was 3 days long. There was so much stuff. So, and then one of the items that sold the second day before we bought the bar was a fox, it looked like, on top of a little petition, and that ended up down in Saginaw, I think. And I had a list of everything that sold at the auction because I became good friends with the auctioneer. So I called the guy up. I says, how much do you want for that fox? He said, I don't think it's a fox, but he says, I paid $75 at the auction. I'll sell it to you for $100. So we drove to Saginaw, because the kids used to call it the Red Fox Saloon, because the petition, if any of you, some of you are old enough, remember when you walked into the bar, there was always a petition, so the kids or the wives didn't go buy that petition, but they would go in and say, tell my daddy better get it. But they always called it the Red Fox Saloon, but it's actually a stuffed fisher, so it's one of the oddball items we picked out. Anything else? If not, well, I appreciate you having us out here. It's been our pleasure.